In the Luhansk region, the Ukrainians launched their second wave of attacks and assaulted even more Russian positions than previously. This is a little bit ironic because Russian media sources have just started talking about the decreased intensity of Ukrainian attacks and that the situation has stabilized, and the Russians are preparing for a counterattack. The reason why the Russians started talking about retaliation is that the Ukrainians finally began fortifying their positions on the Oskil River's eastern bank. However, it seems to indicate that the Ukrainians might be learning from their enemies' mistakes. The Russians failed to fortify their positions in the Kharkiv region because they thought they would continue having the upper hand, and as a result, they lost some of the most strategically valuable bridgeheads in the entire Ukraine. That is why it is important to fortify your rear positions even when you are constantly attacking. And when it comes to the attacks, apart from the regular fights in Mykolaiv and Orlyansk, the Ukrainians doubled down on storming the Kislivka group from the north. As you can see, this group is located in a salient, which means that they have to repel Ukrainian attacks from 3 sides at once. One of the notable events today is that even according to Russian sources, the fights are taking place inside Yehidny. This tells us a lot about the situation here. Previously, I told you that the Ukrainians were assaulting Stepova Novoselivka and Ivanivka while Yehidny was still pretty untouched. Over the last 2 weeks, the information about the fights in this region became hard to disentangle because there are so many places from where the Ukrainians could attack, meaning that simple reports were not informative. However, the fact the fights shifted toward Yehidny strongly indicates that the Russians have been pushed out of Stepova Novoselivka and Ivanivka because otherwise, attacking Yehidny would be a suicide operation. Overall, the salient becomes smaller and smaller, which means that the Russians have fewer defense positions, less flexibility, and smaller chances of survival. If previously the attacks could be repelled from many defensive positions, then now all attacks are directed towards the same defensive position, making it incredibly hard to defend it. In the central and southern parts of the region, fights are taking place between the Zarabets and Krasna rivers. Both parties claim control over Makiyivka and Nevsk, however, there are a few inconsistencies. The Russians are also continuously reporting about Ukrainian assaults on Ploschenka and Chervenopopivka, which are 7 to 10 kilometers behind their claimed positions in Makiyivka and Nevsk. This strongly indicates that the Russians are struggling to retain this buffer zone in front of the Svatov-Kremenna defense line. Lastly, in the Kherson region, the Russians seem to have completed evacuation from the western bank. Interestingly, local news suggests that they are only talking about the voluntary evacuation, and right now, the Russians are forcing everybody else from their homes and sending them to the eastern bank. The latest news says that the Russian flag over the Kherson administration building has been removed. But just when the Ukrainians started cheering, the head of the press center of the southern forces announced that this was a Russian provocation to entice the Ukrainians to attack the city. Ukrainian intelligence informs that while the Russians are gradually withdrawing machinery from the northern part of the region, they are reinforcing Kherson with troops, which suggests that they are preparing to give a huge fight inside the city. Overall, the situation in Kherson is suspiciously quiet, which makes me think that this is the quiet before the storm. If you are against the invasion of Ukraine and want to support the work that I am doing, consider making a purchase in the online store UA Supporter. Here you can find a lot of products with Ukrainian symbols, to not only show your support for this channel, but also for Ukraine.